96. Rolls, PT7. And, for those who have not read canon, the wooden sign has somewhat changed, but the inscription here is the same as in J.K. Rowling's original. The fourth meeting. 4:38 p.m., April 17th, 1992. The man wearing the worn, warm coat with 3 faint scars etched forever into his cheek observed Harry Potter as closely as he could while the boy looked around politely at the rows of cottages. Someone whose best friend had died yesterday, Harry Potter seemed strangely composed, though not in any way reminiscent of unfeelingness or normality. "I don't wish to talk about that," the boy had said, "with you or anyone," saying wish and not want, as though to emphasize that he was able to use grown-up words and make grown-up decisions. There had been only one thing Remus Lupin had thought of that might help, after he'd received the owls from Professor McGonagall and that strange man Quirrell. "There's a lot of empty houses," the boy said, glancing around again. Godric's Hollow had changed, in the decade since Remus Lupin had been a frequent visitor. Many of the old, peaked cottages looked deserted, with green leafy vines growing across their windows and their doors. Britain had contracted noticeably in the aftermath of the Wizarding War, having lost not only the dead but the fled. Godric's Hollow had been hard hit. And afterward, still more families had moved elsewhere, to Hogsmeade or magical London, the deserted houses too uncomfortable a reminder. Others had remained. Godric's Hollow was older than Hogwarts, older than Godric Gryffindor, whose name it had taken, and there were families which would reside here until the end of the world and its magic. The Potters had been one such family, and would be again, if the last Potter so chose. Remus Lupin tried to explain all that, simplifying it as best he could for the young boy. The Ravenclaw nodded thoughtfully and said nothing, as though he had understood it all without need of questions. Perhaps that was so. The child of James Potter and Lily Evans, the head boy and head girl of Hogwarts, would hardly be stupid. The child had certainly seemed highly intelligent, for the little time that they had spoken in January, though at that time Remus had done most of the talking. There was also that business with the Wisengamot, which Remus had heard rumors about, but Remus didn't believe a single word of that, any more than he'd believed it about James betrothing his son to Marley's youngest. "There's the monument," Remus said, pointing ahead of them. Harry walked beside Mr. Lupin toward the black marble obelisk, thinking silently. It seemed to Harry that this adventure was essentially misguided. He had no use for grief counseling. That was not Harry's chosen path. So far as Harry was concerned, the 5 stages of grief were rage, remorse, resolve, research, and resurrection. Not that the usual 5 stages of grief had any experimental evidence whatsoever that Harry had ever heard about. But Mr. Lupin had seemed too sincere to refuse, and visiting James and Lily's home was something Harry felt he ought not to turn down. So Harry walked, feeling oddly detached, walking silently through a play whose script he was not interested in reading. Harry had been told that he wasn't to wear the cloak of invisibility for this journey, so that Mr. Lupin could keep track of him. Harry was morally certain that Dumbledore, or both Dumbledore and Mad-Eye Moody, were following them invisibly to see if anyone tried for the bait. There was no way Harry would have been let out of Hogwarts with only Remus Lupin for a guard. Harry didn't expect anything to happen, though. He'd seen nothing to contradict the hypothesis that all the danger centered on Hogwarts, and only Hogwarts. As the two of them walked closer toward the center of town, the marble obelisk transformed into Harry Drew in a breath. He'd been expecting a heroic pose of James Potter with wand leveled against Lord Voldemort, and Lily Potter with arms outstretched in front of the crib. Instead, there was a man with untidy hair and glasses, and a woman with her hair let down and a baby in her arms, and that was all. "It looks very normal," Harry said, feeling an odd catch in his throat. "Madame Longbottom and Professor Dumbledore put their foot down hard," said Mr. Lupin, who was looking more at Harry than at the monument. "They said that the Potters should be remembered as they had lived, not as they had died." Harry looked at the statue, thinking. Very strange to see himself as a baby of stone, with no scar upon his forehead. It was a glimpse at an alternate universe, one where Harry James Potter, no Evansverse to his name, became an intelligent but ordinary wizarding scholar, maybe sorted into Gryffindor like his parents. A Harry Potter who grew up a proper young wizard, knowing little of science for all that his mother was Muggle-born. ultimately changing. Not much. James and Lily wouldn't have raised their son with what Professor Quirrell would have called ambition and what Professor Evans would have called the common endeavor. His birth parents would have loved him very much, and that would not have been much help to anyone in the world except Harry. If someone had undone their death, you were their friend, Harry said, turning to look at Lupin. For a long time, since you were children. Mr. Lupin nodded silently. Professor Quirrell's voice resounded in Harry's approximate memory. The most likely difference is not that you care more. Rather it is that, being a more logical creature than they, only you are aware that the role of friend ought to require this of you. When Lily and James died, Harry said, did you think at all of whether there might be some magical way to get them back, like Orpheus and Eurydice, or the, what was it, Elrin brothers? There is no magic which can undo death, Mr. Lupin said quietly. Some mysteries which wizardry cannot touch. Did you do a mental check of what you thought you knew, how you thought you knew it, and how high the probability was of that conclusion? What? Said Mr. Lupin. Could you repeat that, Harry? I'm saying, did you think about it anyway? Mr. Lupin shook his head. Why not? Because it was already done and over, Remus Lupin said gently. Because wherever James and Lily are now, they would wish me to act for the sake of the living, not the dead. Harry nodded silently. He'd been pretty sure of the answer to that question before he'd asked. He'd already read that script. But he'd asked anyway, just in case Mr. Lupin had spent a week obsessing about it, because Harry could have been wrong. The soft voice of the defense professor seemed to speak in Harry's mind. Surely, if Lupin truly cared, he would not need special instruction for something as simple as thinking for 5 minutes before giving up. Yes, he would, Harry answered the mental voice. Human beings wouldn't suddenly obtain a skill like that just because they cared. I learned about it because I'd read library books, produced by a huge scientific edifice, and that other part of Harry said, in that soft voice. But there is also another hypothesis, Mr. Potter, and it fits the data in a much less complicated way. No, it doesn't. How would people even know what to pretend if nobody had ever cared? They don't know. That is what you observe. The two of them walked onward toward a certain house, past a long row of occupied wizard cottages and other cottages overgrown with vines. Coming finally to the house with half its top blown off and green leaves growing over into the inside, behind a shoulder-high wild-growing hedge lining the sidewalk and a narrow metal gate, Mr. Hagrid had probably stepped right over it, being unable to fit through. The gap in the roof was like a giant mouth had taken a circular bite from the house, leaving spines of wood, what had maybe been support beams, sticking out. To the right side, a single chimney still stood upright, uneaten by the giant bite, but leaning dangerously without its former support. Windows were shattered. Where there should have been a front door were only splinters of wood. To this place Lord Voldemort had come, silently, making less noise than the dead leaves slithering along the pavement. Remus Lupin put a hand upon Harry's shoulder. "Touch the gate," Mr. Lupin urged. Harry reached out a hand and did so. Like a fast-growing flower, a sign burst from the tangled weeds in the ground behind the gate, a wooden sign with golden letters, and it said, "On this spot, on the night of 31 October 1981, Lily and James Potter lost their lives. They were survived by their son, Harry Potter, the only wizard ever to withstand the killing curse, the boy who lived, who broke you-know-whose power. This house has been left in its ruined state, as a monument to the Potters, as a reminder of their sacrifice. In a blank space below, the golden letters were written other messages, dozens of them, magical ink that rose to the surface and gleamed brightly enough to be read before fading and giving way to other messages. So my Gideon is avenged. Thank you, Harry Potter. Farewell wherever you are. We will always be in the Potter's debt. Oh, James, oh, Lily, I am sorry. I hope you're alive, Harry Potter. There is always a price. I wish our last words had been kinder, James. I'm sorry. There is always a dawn after the night. Rest well, Lily. Bless you, boy who lived. You were our miracle." "I guess," Harry said. "I guess that's what people do instead of trying to make it better." Harry stopped. The thought seemed unworthy of this place. He looked up and saw Remus Lupin gazing at him with a look so gentle that Harry wrenched his eyes away to the blasted and broken roof. "You were our miracle." Harry had always heard the word miracle in the context of how, in the natural universe, there was no such thing. And yet, looking at the ruined house, he suddenly knew exactly what the word meant, the note of grace all unexplained. the blessing inexplicable. The Dark Lord had almost won, and then in one night all the darkness and terror had ended, salvation without justification, a sudden dawn from out of the darkness, and even now nobody knew why. If Lily Potter had lived beyond her confrontation with Lord Voldemort, she would have felt that way when she saw her baby alive afterward. "Let's go," whispered the baby boy, 10 years later. They went. The graveyard's entrance was guarded by a lockless gate of the sort that kept out animals, with a place to stand while you moved the door from one side of the standing place to the other. Remus took out his wand. Harry was already holding his, and there was a brief blur as they stepped through. Some of the stones, rising up from the ground, looked as old as the wall in Oxford that his father had said was around 1,000 years old. Hallie Fleming said the first stone that Harry saw, in a carving almost invisibly faded with the erosion of time. Vienna wood, said another. It had been a long time since Harry had visited a graveyard. His mind had still been childlike the last time he'd come to one, long before he'd seen within death's shadow. Coming here now was strange and sad and puzzling, and this has been happening for so long. Why haven't wizards tried to stop it? Why aren't they putting all their strength into that like muggles do with medical research? Only more so, wizards have more reason to hope. The Dumbledores lived in Godric's Hollow too, Harry said, as they walked past a pair of relatively new stones saying Kendra Dumbledore and Ariana Dumbledore. For a long, long time, Mr. Lupin said. They walked further into the graveyard, far toward the end, past many deaths that had been mourned. Then Mr. Lupin pointed at a linked double headstone of marble still white and unaged. "Are there going to be messages there?" Harry said. He didn't want to deal any more with the way that other people dealt with death. Mr. Lupin shook his head. They walked toward the linked white stones and stood before. "What is this?" Harry whispered. Who wrote this?" James Potter, born 27 March 1960, died 31 October 1981. "Wrote what?" said Mr. Lupin, puzzled. Lily Potter, born 30 January 1960, died 31 October 1981. "This," Harry cried. "The inscription." There were tears welling up in Harry's eyes, at the brightness out of place and unexplained, the touch of grace where no grace should have been, the mysterious blessing, tears welling up at the last enemy that shall be destroyed is death. "That," Mr. Lupin said. "That's the motto, I suppose you could call it, of the Potters, though I don't think it was ever something as formal as that. Just a saying handed down from long, long ago." That," Harry scrambled down to kneel beside the grave, touched the inscription with a trembling hand. "How? Things like that can't just be genetic." Then Harry saw what tears had blurred, the faint carving of a line within a circle within a triangle, the symbol of the Deathly Hallows, and Harry understood. "They tried," Harry whispered. "The three Peverell brothers. Had they lost someone precious to them, was that where it had begun? With all their lives they tried, and they made progress, the cloak of invisibility that could defeat the Dementor's sight. But their research wasn't finished. Hiding from death's shadow is not defeating death itself. The resurrection stone couldn't really bring anyone back. The Elder Wand couldn't protect you from old age. So they passed on the mission to their children and their children's children, generation after generation, until it came to me." Could time echo like that, rhyming between this far into the future and that far in the past? It couldn't be coincidence, could it? Not this message, not in this place. My family, you really were my mother and my father. "It doesn't mean resurrecting the dead, Harry," Mr. Lupin said. "It means accepting death and so being beyond death, mastering it." "Did James tell you that?" Harry said, his voice strange. "No," said Mr. Lupin, "but good." Harry rose up slowly from where he had been kneeling, feeling as though he were pushing up a sun upon his shoulders, raising the dawn above the horizon. "Of course other wizards have tried. I am not unique. I was never alone. These feelings in my heart, they're not so special, not in the wizard world or the muggle one. Harry, your wand." There was a sudden excitement in Mr. Lupin's voice, and when Harry raised his wand to look at it closely, he saw that it was gleaming ever so faintly with a silver light welling out of the wood. "Cast the Patronus charm," urged Mr. Lupin. "Try casting it again, Harry." "Oh, right. So far as Mr. Lupin knows, I can't." Harry smiled and even laughed a little. "I'd better not," Harry said. "If I tried to cast the spell in this state of mind, it'd probably kill me." "What?" said Mr. Lupin. "The Patronus charm doesn't do that." Harry James Potter Revens raised his left hand, still laughing, and wiped away some more tears. "You know, Mr. Lupin," Harry said, "it really takes a Baroque interpretation to think that somebody would be walking around, pondering how death is just something we all have to accept, and communicate their state of mind by saying, 'The last enemy that shall be destroyed is death.' Maybe someone else thought it sounded poetic and picked up the phrase and tried to interpret it differently, but whoever said it first didn't like death much. Sometimes it puzzled Harry how most people didn't seem to even notice when they were twisting something around to the 180-degree opposite of its first obvious reading. It couldn't be a raw brain power thing. People could see the obvious reading of most other English sentences. "Also shall be destroyed" refers to a change of future state, so it can't be about the way things are now. Remus Lupin was staring at him with wide eyes. "You certainly are James and Lily's child," the man said, sounding rather shocked. "Yes, I am," Harry said. But that wasn't enough. He had to do something more, so Harry raised his wand in the air and said, his voice as steady as he could make it, "I am Harry James Potter Revens, the son of Lily and James, of the House of Potter, and I accept my family's quest. Death is my enemy, and I will defeat it. Thrain Bane Peverlas sooner on 3 Hiratol Thisum Dath Bay Unan." "What?" Harry said aloud. The words had popped up into his stream of consciousness, as though from his own thoughts, unexplained. "What was that?" said Remus Lupin at the same time. Harry turned, scanning the graveyard, but he didn't see anything. Beside him, Mr. Lupin was doing the same. Neither of them noticed the tall stone worn as though from 1,000 years of age. Upon it, a line within a circle within a triangle, glowing ever so faintly silver, like the light which had shone from Harry's wand, invisible at that distance beneath the still bright sun. Some time later, "Thank you again, Mr. Lupin," Harry said. The tall, faintly scarred man was about to depart once more. "Though I really wish you hadn't. Professor Dumbledore said that I was to porky us back to Hogwarts if anything unusual happened, whether or not it seemed like an attack," Mr. Lupin said firmly. "Which is eminently sensible." Harry nodded. And then, having carefully saved this question for last, "Do you have any idea of what the words meant?" "If I did, I wouldn't tell you," Mr. Lupin said, looking rather severe. "Certainly not without Professor Dumbledore's permission. I can understand your eagerness, but you should not go trying to uncover any ancestral secrets of the Potters until you are an adult. That means after you've passed your newts, Harry, or at least your owls. And I still think you've picked up entirely the wrong idea of what your family motto is meant to say." Harry nodded, sighing internally, and bid Mr. Lupin farewell. Harry went back through Hogwarts to the Ravenclaw Tower, feeling strange and strengthened. He would not have expected any of that, but it had been all to the good. He was passing through the Ravenclaw common room, on the way to his dorm. That was when the shining creature came to him, gleaming soft white beneath the candle fires of the Ravenclaw common room, as it slithered out from nowhere, the silver snake. "Trejan Bayon Pefil Suna, and Tri-Hera Tal Thisum Deeth Beo Juanan. 3 shall be Peveril's sons, and 3 their devices by which death shall be defeated." Spoken in the presence of the 3 Peveril brothers, in a small tavern on the outskirts of what would later be called Godric's Hollow. 97. Rolls, PT 8. For the second time that day, Harry's eyes filled with tears. Heedless of the puzzled eyes of the Ravenclaws in the common room, he reached out to the silver creature which Draco Malfoy had sent, cradling it in his arms like a live thing, and stumbled off in the direction of his dorm room, heading half-blindly for the bottom of his trunk as the silver snake waited silently in his arms. The 5th meeting, 10:12 a.m., Sunday, April 19th. The debtors' meeting which Lord Malfoy had demanded from Harry Potter, who owed Lucius Malfoy a debt of some 58,203 galleons, was held within the Gringotts Central Bank, in accordance with the laws of Britain. There had been some pushback from Chief Warlock Dumbledore, trying to prevent Harry Potter from leaving the security of Hogwarts, a phrase that caused Harry Potter to raise his fingers and silently make quote marks in the air. For his own part, the boy who lived had seemingly pondered quietly, and then assented to the meeting, strangely compliant in the face of his enemy's demand. The headmaster of Hogwarts, who acted as Harry Potter's legal guardian in the eyes of magical Britain, had overruled his ward's assent. The Debts Committee of the Wisengamot had overruled the headmaster of Hogwarts. The chief warlock had overruled the Debts Committee. The Wisengamot had overruled the chief warlock. And so the boy who lived had departed under the heavy guard of Mad-Eye Moody and an aura trio for the Gringotts Central Bank, with Moody's bright blue eye rotating wildly in every direction, as though to signal to any possible attacker that he was on guard and constantly vigilant, and would cheerfully incinerate the kidneys of anyone who sneezed in the general direction of the boy who lived. Harry Potter watched more keenly than before as they marched through the wide-open front doors of Gringotts beneath the motto Fortius Quo Fidelius. On Harry's last 3 visits to Gringotts, he had merely admired the marble pillars, the gold-burning torchlights, the architecture not quite like the human parts of magical Britain. Since then had come the incident at Azkaban and other things, and now, on his 4th visit, Harry was thinking about the Goblin rebellions and Goblin's ongoing resentment at not being allowed to own wands and certain facts, which hadn't been in the first-year history textbook, which Harry had guessed at by pattern matching, and which Professor Flitwick had confirmed in a very quiet voice. Lord Voldemort had killed goblins as well as wizards, an incredibly stupid move on Lord Voldemort's part, unless Harry was really missing something. But what goblins thought of the boy who lived, Harry had no idea. Goblins had a reputation for paying what they owed and taking what they thought owed them, along with a reputation for interpreting those accounts in a somewhat prejudiced fashion. Today, the guards standing upright in armor at regular intervals around the bank were staring at the boy who lived with blank faces and glaring at Moody and the auras with flashes of bitter contempt. At the stands and counters of the bank's foyer, goblin tellers stared with equal contempt at the wizards whose hands they were filling with galleons. One teller smiled a sharp-toothed grin at a witch who was looking angry and desperate. If I understand human nature correctly, and if I'm right that all the humanoid magical species are genetically human plus a heritable magical effect, then you're not likely to become friends with a wizard just because I'm polite to you or say that I'm sympathetic. But I wonder if you would back the boy who lived in a bid to overthrow the ministry if I promised to revoke the wand law afterward, or if I quietly gave you wands and spellbooks in exchange for your support. Is that why the secret of wand making is restricted to people like Ollivander? Though if you really are human, just plain human, then the Goblin Nation probably has its own internal horrors, its own Azkabans, for that is also human nature, in which case sooner or later I must overthrow or reform your own government as well. An aged goblin appeared before them, and Harry inclined his head with careful courtesy, a gesture that the aged goblin returned with an abrupt half-nod. There was no wild train ride. Instead, the aged goblin ushered them into a short hallway that terminated in a small waiting room with 3 goblin-sized benches and 1 wizard-sized chair, within which nobody sat. "Do not sign anything that Lucius Malfoy gives you," Mad-Eye Moody said. "Nothing. Do you understand me, lad? If Malfoy hands you a copy of the wonderful adventures of the boy who lived and asks you for an autograph, tell him that you've sprained a finger. Don't pick up a quill for a single second while you're in Gringotts. If someone hands you a quill, break the quill and then break your own fingers. Do I need to explain further, son?" "Not particularly," Harry said. "We also have lawyers in Muggle Britain, and they'd think your lawyers are cute." A short time later, Harry Potter handed his wand over to an armored goblin guard who frisked him with all manner of interesting-looking probes and gave his pouch to Moody to keep. And then Harry stepped through another door, and a brief waterfall of Thief's Downfall, which evaporated from his skin as soon as he stepped out. On the other side of the door was a larger room, richly paneled and appointed, with a great golden table stretching across it, 2 huge leather chairs on one side of the table, and a small wooden stool on the other, the debtor's perch. 2 goblins in full armor, wearing ornate earpieces and glasses, stood watch around the room. Neither side would have wands or any other device of magic, and the goblin guards would attack immediately if anyone dared to use wandless magic within this peaceable meeting supervised by Gringotts Bank. The ornate earpieces would prevent the goblin guards from hearing the conversation unless directly addressed, The eyepieces would leave the wizards' faces as blurs. It was, in short, something along the lines of actual security, at least if you were an occlumens. Harry climbed up onto his uncomfortable wooden stool, thinking subtle in a tone of some mental sarcasm, and awaited his creditors. It was only a brief interval later, much shorter than the time a debtor could legally be made to wait, when Lucius Malfoy entered into the room, taking up his leather chair with motions worn smooth by practice. His snake-headed cane was missing from his hands. His long white mane drifted behind him the same as ever. His face could not be read. Quietly following behind him was a young boy with white blonde hair, now wearing black robes far finer than any Hogwarts uniform, who followed in his father's footsteps with a controlled face. A boy who was also Harry's creditor to the tune of 40 galleons, and also of House Malfoy, and therefore, technically, covered by the Wisengamot resolution enabling this meeting. Draco. Harry didn't say it aloud, didn't let his own expression change. He could not think of what to say. Not even "I'm sorry" seemed appropriate. Harry hadn't dared say any of that to Draco's patroness either, when they had set up this meeting in a few brief exchanges, and not only because Lucius might be listening. It had been enough to know that Draco's happy thought was still happy, and that he had still been able to want Harry to know it. Lucius Malfoy spoke first, his voice level, his face set. "I do not understand what is happening at Hogwarts, Harry Potter. Would you care to explain it to me?" "I don't know," Harry said. "If I understood these events, I would not have let them happen, Lord Malfoy." "Then answer me this question. Who are you?" Harry gazed evenly at the face of his creditor. "I'm not, you know, who like you thought I was," Harry said. Not being a complete idiot, he'd eventually worked out who Lucius Malfoy had thought he was talking to in front of the Wisengamot. "Obviously, I'm not a normal boy. Equally obviously, that probably has something to do with the boy who lived business. But I don't know what, or why, any more than you do. I asked the Sorting Hat, and it didn't know either." Lucius Malfoy nodded distantly. "I could not think of any reason why you would pay 100,000 galleons to save a mudblood's life. No reason save one, which would account for her power and bloodthirst alike. But then she died at the hands of a troll, and yet you lived. And also my son has told me much of you, Harry Potter, which did not make the tiniest bit of sense. I have heard the ravings of the mad in St. Mungo's, and they were more sensible by far than the events which my son told me under Veritaserum that you enacted, and that portion of this raving lunacy, which you personally carried out, I would have you explain to me, and now." Harry turned to look at Draco, who looked back at him with a face that was screwing up, being controlled, and then tensing up again. "I'd also," Draco Malfoy said in a high and wavering voice, "like to know why, Potter." Harry closed his eyes and spoke without looking. "A boy raised by muggles who thought he was clever. You saw me, Draco, and you thought of how very useful it would be if the boy who lived, out of all the other children in your year, could be shown the truth of things, if we could be friends. And I thought the same thing about you. Only you and I believed different things were true. Not that I'm saying that there are different truths. I mean, there's different beliefs, but there's only one reality, only one universe that can make those beliefs true or false. You lied to me." Harry opened his eyes and looked at Draco. "I would prefer to say," Harry said, not quite with a steady voice, "that the things I told you were true from a certain point of view. A certain point of view." Draco Malfoy looked every bit as angry as Luke Skywalker had had the right to be, and not in a mood to accept Kenobi's excuses either. "There's a word for things that are true from a certain point of view. They're called lies. Or tricks," Harry said evenly. "Statements which are technically true, but which deceive the listener into forming further beliefs which are false. I think it's worth making that distinction. What I told you was a self-fulfilling prophecy. You believed that you couldn't deceive yourself, so you didn't try. The skills you've learned are real, and it would have been very bad for you to start fighting against them internally. People can't make themselves believe that blue is green by an act of will, but they think they can, and that can be almost as bad." "You used me," said Draco Malfoy. "I only used you in ways that made you stronger. That's what it means to be used by a friend. Even I know that's not what friendship is." Now Lucius Malfoy spoke again. "For what purpose? To what end?" Even the elder Malfoy's voice was not quite steady. "Why?" Harry regarded him for a moment, and then turned to Draco. "Your father's probably not going to believe this," Harry said. But you, Draco, should be able to see that everything which has happened is compatible with this hypothesis, and that any more cynical hypothesis wouldn't explain why I didn't press you harder when you thought I had leverage, or why I taught you so much. I thought that the heir of House Malfoy, who'd been publicly seen to grab a muggle-born girl to stop her falling off the roof of Hogwarts, would be a good compromise candidate to lead magical Britain after the Reformation. So you would have me believe, Lucius Malfoy said in a thin voice, that you are claiming to be mad. Well, let us leave all that aside. Tell me who set that troll on Hogwarts. I don't know, Harry said. Tell me who you suspect, Harry Potter. I have 4 suspects. One of them is Professor Snape. Snape, Draco burst out. The second, of course, is the defense professor of Hogwarts, just because he's the defense professor. Harry would have left him out, not wanting to bring Professor Quirrell to the Malfoys' attention if he was innocent, but Draco might have called him on that. The third, you wouldn't believe me about. The fourth is a catch-all category called everything else. And the fifth, Lord Voldemort, I do not think I should name to you. Lucius Malfoy's face contorted in a snarl. Do you think I cannot recognize bait upon your hook? Tell me about this third possibility, Potter. The one you wish me to believe is the true answer, and leave aside games. Harry regarded Lord Malfoy steadily. I once read a book I wasn't supposed to read, and it told me this. Communication is an event that takes place between equals. Employees lie to their bosses, who in turn expect to be lied to. I'm not playing coy. I'm observing that it's simply not possible in our present situation for me to tell you about the third suspect and have you believe that my story was anything but a lure. Draco spoke then. It's father, isn't it? Harry gave Draco a startled look. Draco spoke evenly. You suspect that father sent the troll into Hogwarts to get at Granger, don't you? That's what you're thinking, isn't it? Harry opened his mouth to say, actually, no, and then managed to think ahead and stop himself for once in his life. I see, Harry said slowly. That's what this is about. Lucius Malfoy publicly says that Hermione won't get away with what she's done, and lo and behold, a troll kills her. Harry smiled then, in a way that bared his teeth. And if I deny that here, then Draco, who isn't an Occlumens, can then testify under Veritaserum that the boy who lived does not suspect Lucius Malfoy of having sent a troll into Hogwarts to kill Hermione Granger, sworn to the noble House of Potter, whose blood debt was recently purchased for 100,000 galleons, etc. Harry leaned back slightly, though his wooden stool had no back with which to do it properly. But now that it's been pointed out, I see that it's very reasonable. Obviously, you killed Hermione Granger, just like you threatened to do in front of the whole Wisengamot. I did not, Lucius Malfoy said, expressionless once more. Harry bared his teeth again in that non-smile. Well then, in that case, there must be someone else out there who killed Hermione and messed with the Hogwarts wards, the same person who earlier tried to frame Hermione for Draco Malfoy's murder. Either you killed Hermione Granger after being paid for her life, or you blamed your son's attempted murder on an innocent girl and took all my family's money under false pretenses. One of those 2 things must be true. Perhaps you killed her in hopes of your money being returned. Lucius Malfoy had leaned forward and was staring hard at Harry. Then I would not have given away my money for her in the first place, as you already know. Don't insult my intelligence, Lord Malfoy. No, wait, sorry. You just had to say that in case Draco had to testify to it. Never mind. Lucius Malfoy sat back in his chair and stared. I tried to tell you, Father, Draco said under his breath, but nobody can imagine Harry Potter until they've actually met him. Harry tapped a finger on his cheek. So people are starting to figure out the blatantly obvious. I'm surprised, actually. I wouldn't have predicted that would happen. Harry had by now caught the general rhythm of Professor Quirrell's cynicism and was able to generate it independently. I wouldn't think a newspaper would be able to report on a concept like either X or Y must be true, but we don't know which. I would only expect journalists to report stories consisting of series of atomic propositions, like X is true, Y is false, or X is true and Y is false. Not more complex logical connectors like, if X is true then Y is true, but we don't know whether X is true. And all your supporters ought to be rapidly switching between, you can't prove that Lord Malfoy killed Granger, it could have been someone else, and you can't prove there was someone else to frame Granger. So long as it's uncertain, they should be trying to have it both ways at once. Wait, don't you own the Daily Prophet? The Daily Prophet, Lucius Malfoy said thinly, which I certainly do not own, is far too respectable to publish any such scurrilous nonsense. Unfortunately, not all wizards of influence are so reasonable. Ah, got it. Harry nodded. Lucius glanced at Draco. The rest of what he said, was any of it important? No, father, it was not. Thank you, son. Lucius returned his gaze to Harry. His voice, when he spoke, was something closer to his usual drawl, cool and confident. It is possible that I could be persuaded to show you some favor if you admitted before the Wisengamot, which you clearly know, that I was not responsible for this deed. I would be willing to reduce your remaining debt to House Malfoy quite significantly, or even adjust the terms to allow later repayment. Harry regarded Lucius Malfoy steadily. Lucius Malfoy. You are now perfectly aware that Hermione Granger was, in fact, framed using your son as bait, that she was false memory charmed or worse, and that House Potter held nothing against you before that. My counter-proposal is that you return my family's money. I announce before the Wisengamot that House Potter holds House Malfoy no animus, and we present a united front against whoever's doing this. We decide to screw the roles we're supposed to play and ally with each other instead of fighting. It could be the one thing the enemy doesn't expect us to do. There was a brief silence in the room, except for the two goblin guards who went on breathing regardless. You are mad, Lucius Malfoy said coldly. It's cold justice, Lord Malfoy. You cannot possibly expect me to cooperate with you while you are holding the wealth of House Potter under what you now know to be false pretenses. I understand how it looked to you at the time, but you know better now. You have nothing to offer me worth 100,000 galleons. Don't I? Harry said distantly. I wonder. I think it quite probable that you care more about the long-term welfare of House Malfoy than about whichever political issue the last generation's failed Dark Lord made his personal hobbyhorse. Harry glanced significantly at Draco. The next generation is drawing its own battle lines and forming new alliances. Your son can be frozen out of that, or he can go straight to the top. Is that worth more to you than 40,000 galleons you weren't particularly expecting and don't particularly need? Harry smiled thinly. 40,000 galleons. 2 million Muggle pounds sterling. Your son knows some things about the size of the Muggle economy that might surprise you. They'd find it amusing that the fate of a country was revolving around 2 million pounds sterling. They'd think it was cute. And I think much the same, Lord Malfoy. This isn't about me being desperate. This is about you getting a fair chance to be fair. Oh, said Lord Malfoy. And if I refuse your fair chance, what then? Harry shrugged. Depends what sort of coalition government gets put together without the Malfoys. If the government can be reformed peacefully, and it would disturb the peace to do otherwise, I'll pay you the money out of petty cash. Or maybe the Death Eaters will be retried for past crimes and executed as a matter of justice, as a result of due legal process, of course. You truly are mad, Lucius Malfoy said quietly. You have no power, no wealth, and yet you say such things to me. Yes, it's silly to think I could scare you. After all, you're not a Dementor. And Harry went on smiling. He'd looked it up, and apparently a Bezoar would heal almost any poison if you shoved it into someone's mouth fast enough. Maybe that wouldn't repair radiation damage from transfigured polonium, but then again, maybe it would. So Harry had looked up the freezing points of various acids, and it turned out that sulfuric acid would freeze at just 10 degrees Celsius, which meant Harry could buy a liter of acid on the Muggle market, freeze it solid, and transfigure it down to a tiny little unnauticable water ice chip to be flipped into someone's mouth and ingested. No Bezoar would compensate for that, once the transfiguration wore off. Harry had no intention of saying it out loud, of course, but now that he'd failed decisively to prevent any deaths during his quest, he had no further intention of being restrained by the law or even the code of Batman. Last chance to live, Lucius. Ethically speaking, your life was bought and paid for the day you committed your first atrocity for the Death Eaters. You're still human, and your life still has intrinsic value, but you no longer have the deontological protection of an innocent. Any good person is licensed to kill you now if they think it'll save net lives in the long run, and I will conclude as much of you if you begin to get in my way. Whoever sent the troll after Granger must have targeted you too and hit you with some curse that makes former Death Eaters melt into a pile of goo. Very sad. Father, Draco said in a small voice. I think you should consider it, Father. Lucius Malfoy looked at his son. You jest. It's true. I don't think Potter just made up his books. Nobody could have written all that, and there were things in them that I could check for myself. And if even half of all that is true, he's right. 100,000 galleons won't mean much. If we give it to him, he really will be friends with House Malfoy again, the way he thinks of being friends anyway. And if we don't, he'll be your enemy, whether it's in his own interests or not. He'll just go after you. Harry Potter really does think like that. It's not about money to him, it's about what he thinks is honor. Harry Potter inclined his head, still smiling. But let's get one part of it straight, Draco said, now staring directly at him. There was a fierce light in his eyes. You wronged me, and you owe me. Acknowledged, Harry said quietly. Conditional on the rest of it, of course. Lucius Malfoy opened his mouth to say who knew what, and then closed it again. Mad, he said again. There was a long father and son argument, during which Harry managed to keep his mouth shut. When it seemed that even Draco wouldn't be able to persuade his father, Harry spoke up again and proposed his intended next steps if the houses of Potter and Malfoy could cooperate. Then came more argument between Lucius and Draco, during which Harry again stayed silent. Finally, Lucius Malfoy's eyes turned to gaze at Harry. And you believe, Lucius Malfoy said, that you can persuade Longbottom and Bones to go along with this notion, even if Dumbledore opposes it? Harry nodded. They'll be suspicious of your involvement, of course, but I'll tell them that it was my plan to start with, and that should help. I suppose, Lucius Malfoy said after a pause, that I could have a contract drawn up, absolving you of almost all the remaining debt, if by some chance I do go along with this mad idea. It shall need more guarantees, of course. Harry promptly reached into his robes and drew out a parchment, unfolding it and spreading it across the golden table. I've taken the liberty myself, actually, Harry said. He'd spent some careful hours in the Hogwarts library with the law books available. Thankfully, so far as Harry could tell, the laws of magical Britain were charmingly simple by Muggle standards. Writing that the original blood debt and payment was cancelled, the Potter's wealth and all other vault items would be returned, and the remaining debt annulled, all with no fault to the Malfoys, was only a few more lines than it took to say out loud. I had to promise my keepers not to sign anything you gave me, so I made sure to compose this myself and sign it before I left. Draco emitted a choked laugh. Lucius read through the contract, smiling humorlessly. How charmingly straightforward. I also promised not to touch a quill while I was in Gringotts, Harry said. He reached into his robes again and drew out a Muggle pen, along with a sheet of normal paper. Will this wording be all right? Harry rapidly scribbled down a legal-sounding statement to the effect that House Potter didn't hold House Malfoy responsible in any way for Hermione Granger's murder, and didn't believe they had anything to do with it, then held up the paper in the air for Lord Malfoy's inspection. Lord Malfoy looked at the paper, rolled his eyes slightly and said, Good enough, I suppose. Though to have the proper meaning, you should use the legal term indemnify rather than exonerate. Nice try, but no. I know exactly what that word means, Lord Malfoy. Harry took his parchment and began copying down his original wording more carefully. When Harry was done, Lord Malfoy reached across the golden table and took the pen, looking at it thoughtfully. One of your Muggle artifacts, I suppose. What does this do, son? It writes without needing an inkwell, Draco answered. I can see that. I suppose some might find it an amusing trinket. Lucius smoothed the parchment contract over the table, then set his hand by the line for signatures, tapping the pen thoughtfully on the starting spot. Harry wrenched his eyes away, up to Lucius Malfoy's face, forcing himself to breathe regularly, not quite able to stop his muscles from tensing. Our good friend, Severus Snape, said Lucius Malfoy, still tapping the pen on the line awaiting his signature. The defense professor calling himself Quirrell. Now I ask again, who is your third suspect, Harry Potter? I would strongly advise that you sign first, Lord Malfoy, if you're going to do so anyway. You will benefit from this information more if you do not think I am trying to persuade you of something. Another humorless smile. I shall take my chances. Speak, if you wish this to continue. Harry hesitated, then said evenly, My third suspect is Albus Dumbledore. The tapping pen stilled on the parchment. A strange allegation, Lucius drawled. Dumbledore lost much face when a Hogwarts student died within his tenure. Do you suppose that I will believe anything of him only because he is my enemy? He is one suspect among several, Lord Malfoy, and not necessarily the most plausible. But the reason I was able to kill a full-grown mountain troll was that I had a weapon which Dumbledore gave to me at the start of the school year. It's not strong evidence, but it's suspicious. And if you're thinking that murdering one of his students is not Dumbledore's style, well, the same thought had occurred to me. It's not his style, Draco Malfoy said. Lucius Malfoy shook his head in a measured, careful movement. Not quite, my son. Dumbledore is particular in his evils. Lord Malfoy leaned back into his chair and then sat quite still. Tell me of this weapon. I am not yet certain I should go into details about that in your presence, Lord Malfoy. Harry took a breath. Let me be clear on this. I am not trying to sell you on the idea that Dumbledore is behind this, just raising the possibility. Then Draco Malfoy spoke. The device Dumbledore gave you, was it something to kill trolls? I mean, just trolls. Can you tell us that? Lucius turned his head to look at his son with some surprise. No, Harry said slowly. It wasn't specifically a sword of anti-troll slaying or anything like that. Draco's eyes were intent. Would the device have worked against an assassin, not if they had shields raised? No, a fight in school. An expanding rock in the throat is inherently lethal. No, I don't think it was meant for use against humans. Draco nodded. So just magical creatures. Would it have been a good weapon against an angry hippogriff, or something like that? Does the stunning hex work on hippogriffs? Harry said slowly. I don't know, said Draco. Yes, said Lucius Malfoy. Compared to trying to target a Wingardium Leviosa and finite incantatum, then a stunning hex would be a better way of dealing with a hippogriff. Put that way, it did seem increasingly like a transfigured rock was an optimal weapon only against a flesh-and-blood magical creature with spell-resistant skin. But, I mean, it might not have been intended as a weapon at all. I used it in a strange way. It could have just been a crazy whim. No, Lucius Malfoy said lowly. Not a whim, not coincidence, not Dumbledore. Then it's him, Draco said. Slowly, Draco's eyes narrowed, and he gave a vicious nod. It's been him since the beginning. The court legilimens said that someone had used legilimency on Granger. Dumbledore admitted that it was him, and I bet the wards did go off when Granger cursed me and Dumbledore just ignored them. But Harry said. He looked at Lucius, wondering if it was really to his advantage to question this idea. What would be his motive? Are we going to say he's evil and leave it at that? Draco Malfoy jumped out of his chair and began pacing around the room, black robes swishing behind the young boy, the goblin guards staring at him in some surprise through their enchanted goggles. To figure out a strange plot, look at what happens, then ask who benefits. Except that Dumbledore didn't plan on you trying to save Granger at her trial. He tried to stop you from doing that. What would have happened if Granger had gone to Azkaban? House Malfoy and House Potter would have hated each other forever. Of all the suspects, the only one who wants that is Dumbledore, so it fits. It all fits. The one who really committed the murder is Albus Dumbledore. Harry said. But why give me an anti-troll weapon? I said it was suspicious. I didn't say that it made any sense. Draco nodded thoughtfully. Maybe Dumbledore thought you'd stop the troll before it got Granger, and then he could blame Father for sending it. A lot of people would be very angry if they thought Father had even tried to do something like that, in Hogwarts. Like Father said, Dumbledore must have lost face when people found out that a student had actually died in Hogwarts. Being safe is what Hogwarts is famous for. So that part probably wasn't supposed to happen. Harry's mind involuntarily flashed back to the horror in Dumbledore's eyes when he'd seen Hermione Granger's body. Would I have gotten there in time if the Weasley twins hadn't had their magic map stolen? Could that have been the plan? And then, though Dumbledore didn't know it, somebody stole their map, and I was too late. But no, that doesn't make much sense. I found out too late. How could Dumbledore have guessed that I'd use a broomstick? Well, he did know I had one. There was no way a plan like that could work, and it hadn't. But someone going a little bit senile might expect it to work, and a phoenix might not know the difference. Or, Draco Malfoy continued, still pacing energetically, maybe Dumbledore had an enchanted troll around, and he expected you to defeat it some other time, for some other plot, and then he used the troll on Granger instead. I can't imagine Dumbledore had this all planned since the first week of lessons. I can imagine, Lucius Malfoy said in low tones. I have seen such from Dumbledore. Draco nodded decisively. Then I was never supposed to die in the first plot. Dumbledore knew Professor Quirrell was checking on me, or Dumbledore planned to have someone else find me in time. I couldn't have testified against Granger if I was dead, and he'd have lost face if I'd died. But my leaving Hogwarts and not being around to lead Slytherin would be just right for him. And then the next time Harry was supposed to stop the troll before it got Granger, and everyone was supposed to blame you, Father, only that time it didn't go the way Dumbledore planned. Lucius Malfoy lifted his grey eyes from where he'd been gazing with open surprise at his son. If this is true, but I wonder if Harry Potter is only playing at being reluctant to believe it. Maybe, Draco said, but I'm pretty sure he isn't. Then, if it is true, Lucius Malfoy's voice trailed off. A slow fury was lighting in his eyes. What would we do, exactly? Harry said. That too is clear to me, Draco said. He whirled on them and raised a finger high in the air. We shall find the proof to convict Dumbledore of this crime and bring him to justice. Harry Potter and Lucius Malfoy looked at each other. Neither of them quite knew what to say. My son, Lucius Malfoy said after a time, truly, you have done very well this day. Thank you, Father. However, this is not a play, we are not Aurors, and we do not put our trust in trials. Some of the light went out of Draco's eyes. Oh, I do have a sentimental fondness for trials, Harry interjected. I cannot believe I am having this conversation. He needed to go home and take a sheet of paper and a pencil and try to figure out whether Draco's reasoning actually made sense. And evidence. Lucius Malfoy turned his gaze to Harry Potter then, and his eyes simmered in pure grey fury. If you have deceived me, Lucius Malfoy said in tones of low anger, if all this is a lie, then I will not forgive. But if this is not deception, bring me the proof to convict Dumbledore of this murder before the Wisengamot, or evidence enough to have him cast down, and there is nothing that House Malfoy will not do for you, Harry Potter. Nothing. Harry took a deep breath. He needed to sort all this out and figure out the actual probabilities, but he didn't have time. If it is Dumbledore, then removing him from the game board leaves a huge hole in Britain's power structure. So it does, Lucius Malfoy said with a grim smile. Did you have ambitions of filling it yourself, Harry Potter? Some of your opposition might not like that. They could fight. They will lose, Lucius Malfoy said, now with a face hard like iron. So this is what I'd want House Malfoy to do for me, Lord Malfoy, if Dumbledore gets removed because of me. When the opposition is most frightened, that's when they'll be offered a last-minute arrangement to avoid a civil war. Some of your allies might not prefer it, but there'll be a lot of neutrals who'll be glad to see stability. The bargain will be that instead of you taking over right away, Draco Malfoy will take power when he comes of age. What? Draco said. Draco has testified under Veritasrum that he tried to help Hermione Granger. I bet there'd be a lot of people in the opposition who'd take a chance on him rather than fight. I'm not sure how exactly you'd enforce it, unbreakable vows, or Gringotts contracts, or what. But there'll be some sort of enforceable compact about power going to Draco after he graduates Hogwarts. I'll throw any support the boy who lived has behind that bargain. Try to persuade Longbottom and Bones and so on. Our first plan paves the way for that later, if you're careful to act honorable when you deal with Longbottom and Bones this time around. Father, I swear I didn't. Lucius's face twisted into a grim smile. I know you didn't, son. Well, the white-haired man stared across the mighty golden table at Harry Potter. Those terms are acceptable to me, but fail in any part of our agreement, whether our first bargain or the second, and there shall be consequences for you, Harry Potter. Clever words will not halt that. And Lucius Malfoy signed the parchment. Mad-Eye Moody had been staring at the bronze door of the Gringotts meeting room for what seemed like hours, insofar as a man could stare at any one thing when his gaze always saw in all directions. The trouble with trying to be suspicious of a man like Lucius Malfoy, Moody thought, was that you could spend an entire day thinking of everything he might be up to and still not have finished. The door cracked open and Harry Potter trudged out, small beads of sweat still on his forehead. Did you sign anything? Mad-Eye demanded upon the instant. Harry Potter looked at him silently, then reached into his robes and drew out a folded parchment. The goblins are already executing this, said Harry Potter. They made 3 copies before I left. Merlin, damn it, son. Moody paused as his eye caught sight of the second half of the document as Harry Potter slowly, as though reluctantly, began to unfold the top upward. A glance sufficed to take in the paragraphs drawn in careful handwriting, Lucius Malfoy's elegant signature below Harry Potter's. And then Moody exploded, even as the top half of the document also began to enter his sight. You exonerate House Malfoy of any involvement in Hermione Granger's death. Do you have any idea what you've done, you little fool? Why in Merlin's name would you do something like what? 98. Rolls Final. Sunday, April 19th, 6:34 p.m. Daphne Greengrass walked quietly toward the Greengrass room below the Slytherin dungeons, the privilege of an ancient house, on her way to drop off her trunk from the Hogwarts Express before she joined the other students for dinner. The whole private area had been hers alone ever since Malfoy had gone. Her hand, held behind her, made repeated come-along gestures at her huge emerald-studded trunk, which seemed hesitant to follow. Maybe the enchantments on the sturdy old family device needed to be reapplied. Or maybe her trunk was reluctant to follow her into Hogwarts, which was no longer safe. There had been a long talk between mother and father after they'd been told about Hermione, with Daphne hiding around a doorway to listen, choking back her tears and trying not to make sounds. Mother had said that the sad fact was that if only one student died every year, well, that still made Hogwarts safer than Beauxbatons, let alone Durmstrang. There were more ways for a young witch to die than being murdered. Beauxbatons's transfiguration master just wasn't on the same level as McGonagall, Mother had said. Father had soberly remarked how important it was for the Greengrass heir to stay at Hogwarts, where all the other noble families sent their children to school. It was the reason for the old tradition of the noble families synchronizing the birth of their heirs, to put them in the same year of Hogwarts, if they could. And Father had said that being heiress to a most ancient house meant you couldn't always stay away from trouble. She could have done without hearing that last part. Daphne gulped hard as she turned the doorknob and opened the door. Miss Greengrass, whispered a shadowy, silvery-robed figure. Daphne screamed and slammed the door and drew her wand and turned to run. Wait, cried the voice, now higher and louder. Daphne paused. That couldn't possibly be who it had sounded like. Slowly, Daphne turned and opened the door again. You, Daphne said in astonishment as she saw the face beneath the hood. I thought you were. I come back to you now, the silvery-robed figure said in a strong voice. At the turn of the, what are you doing in my bedroom? Shrieked Daphne. I heard you can cast the mist form of the Patronus charm. Can I see? Daphne stared, and then her blood began to burn. Why? She said, keeping her wand level. So you can kill everyone in Slytherin who casts Unslytherin spells. We all know who it was had Hermione killed. The figure's voice rose. I testified under Veritasrum that I tried to help Miss Granger. I really was trying to help her when I grabbed her hand on the roof, when I helped her off the floor. Daphne kept her wand level. Like your father couldn't tamper with the Aura's record if he wanted to. I wasn't born yesterday, Mr. Malfoy. Slowly, as if not to cause alarm, the silver-robed figure drew a wand from his robes. Daphne's hand tightened on her own wand, but then she recognized the position of the fingers on the wand, the stance the figure was assuming, and she drew a shocked breath, expecto patronum. Silver light leapt from the end of the other's wand, and condensed, forming a shining serpent that seemed to coil in the air as though nesting there. She just gaped. I did try to help Hermione Granger, Draco Malfoy said with a level voice. Because I know the sickness at the heart of Slytherin's house, the reason why so many of us can't cast the Patronus charm anymore is hate. Hate of Muggleborns, or just anyone really. People think that's all Slytherin is about now, not cunning or ambition or honorable nobility. And I even know, because it's obvious if you just look, that Hermione Granger wasn't weak at magic. Daphne's mind had gone completely blank. Her eyes darted around nervously, just to check that there wasn't blood coming from under the doors, like the last time something had broken. And I've also figured out, Draco Malfoy said quietly, as the silver snake went on shining with unmistakable light and warmth, that Hermione Granger never really tried to kill me. Maybe she was false memory charmed, maybe she was legilimized, but now that she's been murdered, it's obvious that Miss Granger was the target in the first place. When somebody tried to set her up for murdering me, dee-doo-doo, you know what you're saying. Daphne's voice broke. If Lucius Malfoy heard his heir saying that, he'd skin Draco and turn him into trousers. Draco Malfoy smiled, metallic robes gleaming in the light of his full corporeal patronus. It was a smile both arrogant and dangerous, like being turned into a pair of leather pants was beneath his concerns. Yes, said Draco, but it doesn't matter now. House Malfoy is returning House Potter's money and cancelling the debt. Daphne walked over to her bed and then fell on it, hoping she could wake up from the dream once she was in bed. Like you to join a conspiracy, said the figure in the shining robes. Everyone in Slytherin who can cast the Patronus charm, and everyone who can learn. That's how we'll know to trust each other when the silvery Slytherins meet. With a dramatic gesture, Draco Malfoy cast back his hood. But it won't work without you, Daphne Greengrass. You and your family. Your mother will negotiate it with father, but I'd like the Greengrasses to hear the proposal from you first. Draco Malfoy's voice lowered grimly. There is much we must speak of before we eat dinner. Harry Potter had, apparently, taken to being invisible. They'd glimpsed his hand only briefly when he was handing them the list, written on strange knot parchment. Harry had explained that, all things considered, he didn't really think it was smart for him to be findable except on special occasions. So he was just going to deal with people as a disembodied floating voice from now on, or as a brilliant silver light that hid behind corners where nobody could see it, and which could always find his friends no matter where they tried to hide. It was, in all honesty, one of the creepiest things which Fred and George had ever heard, over a lifetime which had included filling the shoes of every student in second-year Slytherin with transfigured live millipedes. Fred and George didn't think this could possibly be good for anyone's sanity, but they didn't know what to say. It couldn't be denied. They'd seen with their own 4 eyes that Hogwarts wasn't safe. I don't know who you went to for the false memory charm on Rita Skeeter, said the sourceless voice of Harry Potter. Whoever it is, probably won't be able to fill this order directly, but they may know someone who can get things from the Muggle world. And I know it may cost extra, but as few people as possible should know that Harry Potter is related to this. Another flash of a small boy's hand, and a bag hit the ground with the clinking noise. Some of these items are expensive even in the Muggle world, and your contact may have to go outside Britain, but 100 galleons will be enough to pay for it all, I hope. I'd tell you where the galleons came from, but I don't want to spoil tomorrow's surprise. What is this stuff? Said Fred or George as they looked over the list. Our father is a Muggle expert, and we don't recognize half this stuff. Why, we don't recognize any of it. Just what are you planning to do? Things have become serious, Harry's voice said softly. I don't know what I'll have to do. I may need the power of the Muggles, not just the wizards, before this is done, and I might need it right away, with no time to prepare. I'm not planning to use any of this. I just want it around in case of contingencies. Harry's voice paused. Obviously, I owe you more than I can ever repay, and you won't let me give you any of what you deserve. I don't even know how to say thank you properly, and all I can do is hope that someday when you grow up you'll be more sensible about this whole thing, and would you please take a 10% commission? Shut up, you, said George or Fred. For God's sake, you went after a troll for me and Fred had his ribs broken. They both just shook their heads. Harry had stayed behind when they told him to run, and stepped forward to distract the troll from eating George. Harry was the kind of person, they knew, who'd think that something like that didn't cancel out what he owed the Weasley twins, that his own deed wasn't properly commensurate. But what the Weasleys knew, and Harry wouldn't understand until he was older, was that it meant that nothing was owed, or ever could be owed between them. It was a strange kind of selfishness, they thought, that Harry could understand kindness within himself, never dreaming of asking of money from anyone he'd helped more than they'd helped him, or calling that a debt, while being apparently unable to conceive that others might want to act the same way toward him. Remind me to buy you a copy of the Muggle novel Atlas shrugged, the sourceless voice said. I'm starting to understand what sort of person can benefit from reading it. Monday, April 20th, 7:00 p.m. It happened without any intervention or sign from the head table, as the students had finished their subdued dinner. It happened with no permission or forgiveness asked from the professors or the headmaster. Shortly after the dessert dishes had appeared, a student stood up from the Slytherin table and calmly made his way, not to the front of the head table, but toward the opposite side of the 4 tables of Hogwarts. A few whispers broke out at the sight of the white blonde, short-cropped hair, as Draco Malfoy stood there, silently regarding all of Hogwarts. Draco Malfoy had said almost nothing since his surprise return. The Slytherin had condescended neither to confirm nor deny that he had returned because, with Hermione Granger dead at his family's hand, he no longer had anything to fear. Then Draco Malfoy took up a spoon in one hand and a glass of water in the other, and began tapping, producing a clear ringing sound. Ting, ting, ting. It produced more excited babble at first. At the head table, the various professors looked in puzzlement toward the headmaster in his great chair, but the headmaster gave no sign, and so the faculty did nothing. Draco Malfoy continued tapping the spoon upon his glass until the room fell silent, waiting. Then another student arose from the Ravenclaw table and made his way to where Draco Malfoy was standing, turning to face Hogwarts at his side. Breaths were drawn in surprise. Those two should have been the bitterest of enemies. I, and my father, the lord of the noble and most ancient house of Malfoy, Draco Malfoy said in a clear voice, have come to realize that there are ill forces at work in Hogwarts, that these ill forces did wish Hermione Granger harm. That Hermione Granger was perhaps compelled, against her will, to raise her hand against our house, or perhaps she and I were both memory charmed. We now say that whoever dared use the heir of Malfoy so is the enemy of House Malfoy, upon whom we shall have our vengeance. And that honor be served, we have returned all moneys taken from House Potter and cancelled all debt. Then Harry Potter spoke. House Potter acknowledges that it was an honest mistake and holds House Malfoy no ill will. We believe and publicly say that House Malfoy was not at fault in Hermione Granger's death. Whoever harmed Hermione Granger is the enemy of House Potter, upon whom we shall have our vengeance, both of us. Then Harry Potter began to walk back to the Ravenclaw table, and the babble of sheer, utter, reality-crashing bewilderment began to explode. Draco Malfoy resumed tapping his spoon against his water glass, creating a clear ringing chime. Ting, ting, ting. And other students arose from other tables, making their way to where Draco Malfoy stood, arranging themselves at his side, or behind him, or before him. There was a dread silence in the great hall, a sense of the world shifting, of realigning powers, almost tangible in the air. My father, Owen Greengrass, with the consent and full backing of my mother, the lady of the noble and most ancient house of Greengrass, Daphne Greengrass spoke. And my forefather, Charles, of the house of Nart, said the former Lieutenant Nart, once Theodore of Chaos, now standing behind Draco Malfoy. And my grandaunt, Amelia, of the House of Bones, also director of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, said Susan Bones, who stood annexed Daphne Greengrass, beside whom she had fought. And my grandmother, Augusta, of the noble and most ancient House of Longbottom, said Neville Longbottom, who had returned for this one night. And my father, Lucius, the Lord Malfoy, of the noble and most ancient House of Malfoy, together with Alana Howe constituting a majority of the Hogwarts Board of Governors, Daphne Greengrass said clearly, have, to ensure the safety of all students, including their own children, passed the following educational decrees upon the Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. First, Daphne said. Daphne was trying to keep her trembling under control as she faced the 4 houses at the forefront of the 5. There was only so far her parents' lessons in speech-making could take her. Daphne's eyes darted down quickly to her hand, upon which, written with a quill in faint red ink, cues to her lines had been written. Students are not to go anywhere alone, not even to the toilets. You will travel in groups of at least 3, and every group must have a 6th-year or 7th-year student. Second, Susan Bones said from behind her, voice almost firm. To further ensure the students' safety, 9 auras have been dispatched to Hogwarts to form an auxiliary protective force. Susan took a small, round glass object from within her robes, one of the communicators that the DMLE used, which they'd all been given. Susan raised it to her mouth and said, her voice now higher, Aura Brodsky, this is Susan Bones. Enter. The doors to the hall slammed open, and in marched 9 auras in the reinforced leather gear they used when on duty. At once they spread out, 2 auras taking up station by each of the 4 tables, and the last took up watch at the head table. There were more gasps. "Third," said Draco Malfoy, his voice commanding. Malfoy had apparently memorized his own lines, since there was nothing written on his hand that Daphne could see. The face of a common enemy who does not balk at killing students from any house. The four houses of Hogwarts must come together and act as one. To emphasize this, the house point system is temporarily suspended. All professors will encourage solidarity between houses by decree of the Hogwarts Board of Governors. Fourth, recited Neville Longbottom. All students not already in the defense professors' after-school classes will receive special training in self-defense by Auror instructors. Fifth, Theodore Nott yelled in a menacing tone. All fighting in the corridors or anywhere outside of defense lessons will be dealt with severely. Fight together or don't fight at all. Sixth, said Daphne Greengrass, and took a deep breath. When she'd found out what was planned, she'd made her own little extra request to Mother through the flu. Even with Lucius Malfoy going along with Amelia Bones, I thought her mind was still having trouble grasping. The Greengrass swing vote had still been vital, since Jugson and his own faction had refused to back Malfoy. Not to mention that Bones didn't trust Malfoy, and Malfoy didn't trust Bones. So Mother had demanded, and the Greengrasses had received. Since memory charms have been used on students without setting off wards, it is possible that someone on the Hogwarts faculty may be implicated. Therefore, the Auxiliary Protective Force reports directly to my father, Lord Greengrass. And this part was only symbolic. She knew there'd be no reason anyone wouldn't just contact the Aurors directly, but it might turn into more someday, which was why she'd asked Mother to demand it. And if anyone wants to report something to the Auxiliary Protectors, they can talk to the Aurors, or go through me. Daphne's arm swept behind her to indicate the gathered students. The duly appointed president of the Auxiliary Protective Special Committee. And Daphne paused dramatically. They'd all rehearsed this part. "We don't know who the enemy is," said Neville, whose voice did not squeak. "We don't know what the enemy wants," said Theodore, still looking menacing. "But we know who the enemy is attacking," said Susan, as fierce as when she'd taken on 3 seventh-year students. "The enemy is attacking Hogwarts students," said Draco Malfoy, clear and commanding, like all this was his natural element. "And Hogwarts," spoke Daphne of Greengrass, feeling her blood burn like it never had before in her life, "is going to fight back." 100. Precautionary Measures, PT1. May 13th, 1992. Argus Filch's face appeared twisted in the light of the oil lamp he held, shadows dancing over his face. Behind them, the doors of Hogwarts quickly receded, and the dark grounds moved closer. The track they now walked was muddy and indistinct. The trees, branches formerly bare with winter, were not yet fully clad with spring. Their branches stretched up toward the sky like lean fingers, skeletons visible amid the thin foliage. The moon was bright, but clouds scudding across it often threw them into darkness, lit only by the dim flames of Filch's lamp. Draco kept a firm grip on his wand. "Where are you taking us?" said Tracy Davis. She'd been caught along with Draco by Filch, on their way to an attempted meeting of the Silvery Slytherins after curfew hours, and likewise given a detention. "You just follow me," said Argus Filch. Draco was feeling rather annoyed with the whole affair. The Silvery Slytherins ought to be recognized school business. There was no reason why a secret conspiracy shouldn't have permission to meet after curfew, if it was for the greater good of Hogwarts. If this happened one more time, he'd talk to Daphne Greengrass and Daphne would talk to her father, and then Filch would learn the wisdom of looking the other way where Malfoys were concerned. The lights of the Hogwarts castle had diminished in the distance when Filch spoke again. "I bet you'll think twice about breaking a school rule again, won't you, eh?" Filch turned his head away from the lamp so that he could leer at the 4 students following him. "Oh, yes. Hard work and pain are the best teachers, if you ask me. It's just a pity they let the old punishments die out. Hang you by your wrists from the ceiling for a few days. I've got the chains still in my office. Keep 'em well oiled in case they're ever needed." "Hey," Tracy said, a touch of indignation entering her voice. "I'm too young to hear about that sort of, especially if the chains are well oiled." Draco wasn't paying attention. Filch simply wasn't in Amicus Carrow's league. Behind them, one of the 2 older Slytherins following them snickered, though she didn't say anything. Beside her was the other, a tall boy with an Slavic cast to his face, and who still spoke with an accent. They'd been caught for some unrelated offense, having to do with the type of thing Tracy went on about, and looked to be in their third or fourth year. "Faye," said the taller boy. "In Durmstrang they hang you upside down by your toes, by one toe if you are insolent. Hogwarts was soft even in the old days." Argus Filch was silent for around half a minute, as though trying to think of a proper rejoinder, and then gave a chuckle. "We'll see what you say about that, when you learn what you'll be doing tonight." "Ha! I said I'm too young for that sort of thing," said Tracy Davis. "It has to wait until I'm older." Ahead of them was a cottage with lighted windows, though the proportions seemed wrong. Filch whistled, a high, sharp sound, and a dog began barking. From the cottage stepped forth a figure, making the trees seem too short around it. The figure was followed by a dog that seemed like a puppy by comparison, until you looked at it apart from the taller silhouette and realized the dog was huge, more like a wolf. Draco's eyes narrowed before he caught himself. As a silvery Slytherin, he wasn't supposed to be prejudiced against any sentient being, especially not where other people might see him. "What's this?" said the figure, in the loud, gruff voice of the half-giant. His umbrella lit up with a white glow, brighter than Filch's dim lamp. In his other hand he held a crossbow. A quiver of short bolts was strapped to his upper arm. "Students serving detention," Filch said loudly. "They're to help you search the forest for whatever's been eating 'em." "The forest," gasped Tracy. "We can't go in there at night." "That's right," said Filch, turning from Hagrid to glare at them. "It's into the forest you're going, and I'm much mistaken if you'll all come out in one piece." "But," said Tracy, "there's werewolves, I've heard, and vampires, and everyone knows what happens when there's a girl and a werewolf and a vampire all at the same time." The huge half-giant was frowning. "Argus, I add in mind you and maybe a few seventh years. There's not much point in bringing along help if I'm to watch over 'em the whole time." Argus's face lit with cruel satisfaction. "That's their lookout, isn't it? Should have thought of them werewolves before they got in trouble, shouldn't they? Send them out alone. I shouldn't be too friendly to them, Hagrid. They're here to be punished, after all." The half-giant gave a massive sigh. It sounded like a normal man having all the air driven out of his lungs by a bludgeoning hex. "You've done your bit. I'll take over from here." "I'll be back at dawn," said Filch. "For what's left of them," he added nastily, and he turned and started back toward the castle, his lamp bobbing away in the darkness. "Right then," said Hagrid. "Now listen carefully, 'cause it's dangerous what we're gonna do tonight, and I darn want no one talkin' risks. Follow me over here a moment." He led them to the very edge of the forest. Holding his lamp up high, he pointed down a narrow, winding earth track that disappeared into the thick black trees. A light breeze blew over Draco's head as he looked into the forest. "There's summat in there that's been eating unicorns," the huge man said. Draco nodded. He distantly remembered hearing something along those lines a couple of weeks ago, toward the end of April. "Did you call us to track down a trail of silvery blood to a wounded unicorn?" Tracy said excitedly. "No," said Draco, though he managed to stop the reflexive sneer. "Filch gave us the detention note at lunch today, at noon. Mr. Hagrid wouldn't wait that long to find a wounded unicorn, and if we were looking for something like that, we'd look in the day when it's bright." So Draco held up a finger like he'd seen Inspector Leon do in plays. "I infer that we're looking for something that only comes out at night." "Aye," said the half-giant, sounding thoughtful. "You're not what I expected, Draco Malfoy. Not what I expected at all. And you be Tracy Davis, then. I've heard of ye, one of poor Miss Granger's lot." Rubeus Hagrid looked over at the two older Slytherins, peering at them in the light of his glowing umbrella. "And who'd ye be again?" "Don't remember seeing much of ye, boy." "Cornelia Walt," said the witch, "and this is Yuri Yuli," indicating the Slavic-looking boy who'd spoken of Durmstrang. "His family is visiting from the Ukrainian lands, so he's in Hogwarts just for the year." The older boy nodded, a faintly contemptuous cast on his face. "This is Fang," Hagrid said, indicating the dog. The five of them set off into the woods. "What could be killing unicorns?" Draco said after they'd walked for a few minutes. Draco knew a bit about dark creatures, but he couldn't remember anything that was said to prey on unicorns. "What sort of creature does that, does anyone know?" "Werewolves," said Tracy. "Miss Davis," Draco said, and when she looked at him, he silently pointed a finger up at the moon. It was waxing gibbous, but not yet full. "Oh, right," said Tracy. No was in the forest, said Hagrid. They're plain wizards most o' the time, member. Couldn't be wolves either. They're not near fast enough to catch a unicorn. Powerful magical creatures. Unicorns are. I never knew one to be hurt before. Draco listened to this, thinking about the puzzle almost despite himself. Then what is fast enough to catch a unicorn? Wouldn't Ave been a matter of speed, Hagrid said, giving Draco an indecipherable glance. There's no end to the ways that creatures hunt. Poison, darkness, traps. Impses can't be seen or heard or remembered, even while they're eating your face. Always somewhat new and wonderful to learn. A cloud passed over the moon, casting the forest into shadow lit only by the glow of Hagrid's umbrella. Myself, Hagrid continued, I think we might have a Parisian Hydra on our hands. They're no threat to a wizard. Ye've just got to keep holding 'em off long enough, and there's no way ye can lose. I mean literally no way ye can lose so long's ye keep fighting. Trouble is, against a Parisian Hydra, most creatures give up long before. Takes a while to cut down all the heads, ye see. Bah, said the foreign boy. In Durmstrang we learn to fight Butchhull's Hydra. Unimaginably more tedious to fight. I mean literally, cannot imagine. First years not believe us when we tell them winning is possible. Instructor must give second order, iterate until they comprehend. They walked for nearly half an hour, deeper and deeper into the forest, until the path became almost impossible to follow because the trees were so thick. Then Draco saw it, thick splashes on the roots of trees, gleaming a brighter color beneath the moonlight. Is that unicorn's blood? Hagrid said. The huge man's voice was sad. In a clearing ahead, visible through the tangled branches of a great oak, they saw the fallen creature, splayed beautiful and sad upon the ground, the dirt around her shining moon-silver with pooled blood. The unicorn was not white, but pale blue, or appearing so beneath the moon and night sky. Her slender legs stuck out at odd angles, obviously broken, and her mane spread across the dark leaves, green-black but with a sheen like pearls. On her flank was a small white shape like a starburst, a center surrounded by 8 straight rays. Half her side had been ripped away, the edges ragged like the marks of teeth, bones and inner organs exposed. A strange choking sensation rose in Draco's throat. That's Hagrid said, his sad whisper as loud as a normal man's voice. Just where I found this morning, dead as a dead doorknob. Was the first unicorn I e'er met in these woods. I called Alicorn, not that it matters to any more, I suppose. You named a unicorn Alicorn, said the older girl. Her voice was a bit dry. But she doesn't have wings, Tracy said. An alicorn's a unicorn's horn, Hagrid said, now louder. Don't know where ye all started thinking it meant a unicorn with wings. There's no such thing I ever heard. It's just like naming a dog Fang, indicating the huge wolf-like dog that barely came to his knees. What you have called Hannah or some such. I gave a name as would have meant summat to common courtesy, I call it. Nobody said anything to this, and after a further moment, the huge man gave a sharp nod. We'll start our search from air, the last place it struck. We're gonna split into 2 parties and follow the trail in different directions. Yet too, Walt and Yulie Yale go that way and take Fang. There's nothing that lives in the forest that'll hurt ye if you're with Fang. Send up green sparks if ye find summat interesting, and send up red sparks if anyone gets in trouble. Davis, Malfoy, with me. The forest was black and silent. Rubeus Hagrid had dimmed the light of his umbrella after they'd set out, so that Draco and Tracy had to steer themselves by the light of the moon, not without occasional trips and falls. They walked past a mossy tree stump, the sound of running water speaking of a stream somewhere close by. Now and then a ray of moonlight through the branches above lit a spot of silver-blue blood on the fallen leaves. They were following the trail of blood toward where the creature must have first struck the unicorn. There's rumors about ye, Hagrid said in a low voice after they'd walked for a while. Well, they're all true, Tracy said. All of them. Not ye, Hagrid said. Did ye really testify under Veritaserum that ye tried to help Miss Granger 3 times it was? Draco weighed his words for a while and finally said, yes. It wouldn't have done to appear too eager to claim credit. The huge man shook his head, his great feet still stomping silently through the woods. I'm surprised, to be honest. And yet too, Davis, trying to put the holes in order. Are ye sure the sorting hat put ye in the right place? There's not a single witch or wizard who went bad who wasn't in Slytherin, so it's always been said. That's not true, Tracy said. What about Zion and Tong the Black Raven, Spencer of the Hill, and Mr. Cavon? Who? Said Hagrid. Just some of the best dark wizards from the last 2 centuries, Tracy said. They're probably the best from Hogwarts who weren't from Slytherin. Her voice fell, lost its enthusiasm. Miss Granger always told me I should read up on anything Anyway, Draco said quickly. That's not really relevant, Mr. Hagrid. Even if Draco worked it around in his head, trying to translate the difference between probability of Slytherin given dark and probability of dark given Slytherin into non-scientific language. Even if most dark wizards are from Slytherin, very few Slytherins are dark wizards. There aren't all that many dark wizards, so not all Slytherins can be one. Or as Father had said, while any Malfoy should certainly know much of the secret lore the more. Costly rituals were better left to useful fools like Amicus Carrow. So you're saying, Hagrid said, that most dark wizards are Slytherins. But most Slytherins are not dark wizards, Draco said. He had a weary feeling they'd be at this a while, but like fighting a hydra, the important thing was to not give up. I never thought of it that way, the huge man said, sounding awestruck. But well, if ye're not all a house of snakes, then why get behind that tree? Hagrid seized Draco and Tracy and hoisted them off the path behind a towering oak. He pulled out a bolt and fitted it into his crossbow, raising it, ready to fire. The 3 of them listened. Something was slithering over dead leaves nearby. It sounded like a cloak trailing along the ground. Hagrid was squinting up the dark path, but after a few seconds the sound faded away. I knew it, Hagrid murmured. There's summat in here that shouldn't be. They went after where the rustling sound had come from, with Hagrid in the lead and Tracy and Draco both gripping their wands at the ready, but they found nothing, despite searching in a widening circle with their ears straining for the faintest sound. They walked on through the dense, dark trees. Draco kept looking over his shoulder, a feeling nagging at him that they were being watched. They had just passed a bend in the path when Tracy yelled and pointed. In the distance, a shower of red sparks lit the air. You 2 wait here. Hagrid shouted, Stay where ye are, I'll come back for ye. Before Draco could say a word, Hagrid spun and crashed away through the undergrowth. Draco and Tracy stood looking at each other until they heard nothing but the rustling of leaves around them. Tracy looked scared, but trying to hide it. Draco was feeling more annoyed than anything else. Apparently Rubeus Hagrid, when he had formed his plans for tonight, had not spent even 5 seconds visualizing the consequences if something actually went wrong. Now what? Said Tracy, her voice a little high. We wait for Mr. Hagrid to come back. The minutes dragged by. Draco's ears seemed sharper than usual, picking up every sigh of the wind, every cracking twig. Tracy kept looking up at the moon, as though to reassure herself that it wasn't full yet. Tracy whispered. I'm getting a little nervous, Mr. Malfoy. Draco thought about it a bit. To be honest, there was something. Well, it wasn't that he was a coward, or even that he was scared. But there had been a murder at Hogwarts, and if he'd been watching himself in a play, having just been abandoned in the Forbidden Forest by a half-giant, he would currently feel like yelling at the boy on stage that he should. Draco reached into his robes and took out a mirror. Tapping the surface showed a man in red robes who frowned almost immediately. Or a Captain Ennis Bradsky, the man said clearly, causing Tracy to start with the loudness in the quiet forest. What is it, Draco Malfoy? Put me on 10-minute check-in, Draco said. He decided not to complain directly about his detention. He did not want to look like a spoiled brat. If I don't respond, come get me. I'm in the Forbidden Forest. Inside the mirror, the Aura's brows rose. What are you doing in the Forbidden Forest, Mr. Malfoy? Looking for the Unicorn Eater with Mr. Hagrid, Draco said, and tapped the mirror off, putting it back in his robes before the Aura could ask anything about detentions or say anything about serving it out without complaining. Tracy's head turned toward him, though it was a little too dim to read her expression. Thanks, she whispered. The few leaves which had emerged on their branches rustled as another, colder breeze blew through the forest. Tracy's voice was a little louder when she spoke again. You didn't have to, she said, now sounding a little shy. Don't mention it, Miss Davis. The dark silhouette of Tracy put her hand to her cheek, as though to conceal a blush that wasn't visible anyway. I mean, not for me. No, really, Draco said. Don't mention it. At all. He would have threatened to take out the mirror and order Captain Brodsky not to rescue her, but he was afraid she would consider that flirting. Tracy's silhouetted head turned from him, looked away. Finally, she said in a smaller voice, "It's too soon, isn't it?" A high scream echoed through the woods, a not quite human sound, the scream of something like a horse, and Tracy shrieked and ran. "No, you numbskull!" yelled Draco, plunging after her. The sound had been so eerie that Draco wasn't certain where it came from, but he thought that Tracy Davis might, in fact, be running straight toward the source of that eerie scream. Brambles whipped at Draco's eyes. He had to keep one hand in front of his face to shield them, trying not to lose track of Tracy, because it seemed obvious that, if this was a play, and they got separated, one of them was going to die. Draco thought of the mirror secured within his robes, but he somehow knew that if he tried to take it out one-handed while running, the mirror would inevitably fall and be lost ahead of them. Tracy had stopped, and Draco felt relieved for an instant before he saw. Another unicorn lay on the ground, surrounded by a slowly widening pool of silver blood, the edge of the blood creeping across the ground like spilled mercury. Her coat was purple, like the color of the night sky, her horn exactly the same twilight color as her skin, her visible flank marked by a pink star blotch surrounded by white patches. The sight tore at Draco's heart, even more than the other unicorn, because this one's eyes were staring glassily right at him, and because there was a blurring, twisting form feeding on an open wound on the unicorn's side, like it was drinking from it. Draco couldn't understand, somehow couldn't recognize what he was seeing. It was looking at them. The blurring, seething, unrecognizable darkness seemed to turn to regard them. A hiss came from it, like the hiss of the deadliest snake which ever had existed, something more dangerous by far than any blue kite. Then it bent back over the wound in the unicorn and continued to drink. The mirror was in Draco's hand, and it remained lifeless as his finger mechanically tapped at the surface, over and over. Tracy was holding her wand now, saying things like prismates and stupefy, but nothing was happening. Then the seething outline rose up, like a man rising to his feet, only not so, and it seemed to scuttle forward, moving with a strange half-jump across the dying unicorn's legs, approaching the two of them. Tracy tugged at his sleeve and then turned to run from something that could hunt down unicorns. Before she could take 3 steps, there came another terrible hiss, burning his ears, and Tracy fell to the ground and did not move. Somewhere in the back of his mind, Draco knew that he was about to die. Even if the aura checked his mirror this very instant, there was no way anyone could get here fast enough. There was no time. Running hadn't worked. Magic hadn't worked. The seething outline came closer, while Draco tried in his last moments to solve the riddle. Then a blazing silver ball of light plunged out of the night sky and hung there, illuminating the forest as bright as daylight, and the seething outline leapt backwards, as though in horror of the light. 4 broomsticks plunged out of the sky, 3 auras with bright multicolored shields, and Harry Potter holding his wand aloft, seated behind Professor McGonagall within a larger shield. "Get out of here!" roared Professor McGonagall, an instant before the seething thing gave forth another terrible hiss, and all the shielding spells winked out. The 3 auras and Professor McGonagall fell off their broomsticks and dropped heavily to the forest floor, lying motionless. Draco couldn't breathe, the most intense fear he'd ever felt in his life gripping all through his chest, sending tendrils around his heart. Harry Potter, who had remained untouched, silently guided his broomstick toward the ground, and then leapt off to stand between Draco and the seething outline, interposing himself like a living shield. "Run," said Harry Potter, turning his head half back to look at Draco. The silver moonlight gleamed on his face. "Run, Draco. I'll hold it off." "Can't fight that thing alone," Draco cried aloud. A nausea was in his stomach, a churning sensation that, looking back in memory, seemed both like and unlike a sense of guilt, as though it had the sensations but not quite all of the emotion. "I must," Harry Potter said grimly. "Go." "Harry, I'm sorry for everything." Though later, looking back, Draco couldn't quite remember what he'd meant to apologize for. Maybe it had been that he was planning to overthrow Harry's conspiracy all that time ago. The seething figure, now seeming blacker and more terrible, rose up into the air, hovering off the ground. "Go," shouted Harry. Draco turned and fled headlong into the woods with the branches whipping at his face. Behind him, Draco heard another terrible hiss, and Harry's voice rising, crying something that Draco couldn't make out from the distance. Draco turned his head for only an instant to look back, and in that moment ran into something, hitting his head hard and blacked out. Harry held a tight grip on his wand, a prismatic sphere glowing around him. He stared levelly at the seething, blurring form in front of him and said, "What on earth are you doing?" The seething blurs resolved, reformed, relaxed back into a hooded form. Whatever concealment had been at work, a device rather than a charm, Harry guessed, since the magic had been able to affect him, had prevented his mind from recognizing the shape, or even that the shape was human. But it hadn't prevented Harry from recognizing the sharp sense of doom. Professor Quirrell stood straight with silver blood all down the front of his enshrouding black cloak and gave a sigh, looking at the fallen forms of three auras, Tracy Davis, Draco Malfoy, and Professor McGonagall. "I had honestly thought," Professor Quirrell murmured, "that I jammed that mirror without alarm. What were two first-year Slytherins doing alone in the Forbidden Forest? Mr. Malfoy has more sense than this." What a fiasco. Harry didn't answer. The sense of doom was as strong as Harry could ever remember feeling it, a feeling of power in the air so great that it was almost tangible. Some part of him was still viscerally shocked at how fast the shields surrounding the auras had been torn apart. He almost hadn't been able to see the successive lashes of color which had torn away the shields like tissue paper. It made the duel Professor Quirrell had fought against the aura in Azkaban look like a mockery. A child's game, though Professor Quirrell had claimed, then, that if he'd fought for real the aura would have been dead in seconds. And Harry knew now that this was also true. Just how high did the power ladder go? "I take it," Harry said, managing to keep his voice steady, "that your eating unicorns has something to do with why you'll get fired from the defense professor position. I don't suppose you'd care to explain in considerable detail." Professor Quirrell looked at him. The almost tangible sense of power in the air seemed to diminish, drawing back into the defense professor. "I shall indeed explain myself," the defense professor said. "I need to cast a few memory charms first, and then we may go off and discuss it, for it would not be wise for me to stay. You will return to this time later, as I know." Harry willed himself to be able to see through the cloak he had mastered, and knew that another Harry stood beside him, hidden by his own deathly halo. Harry then told his cloak to hide himself from himself once more, and it did. Being able to perceive your future self meant having to match the memory later. Harry's own voice said then, sounding strange in present Harry's ears. "He has a surprisingly good explanation." Present Harry remembered the words as best he could. Nothing more was said between them. Professor Quirrell walked to Draco's form and chanted the spell of the false memory charm. The defense professor stood there for perhaps a minute, seemingly lost to the world. Harry had been studying obliviations these last couple of weeks, though he couldn't have helped cast the spells, unless he was willing to exhaust himself almost completely. And for some reason, they wanted an aura to lose every single life memory involving the color blue. But Harry had some idea now of the concentration which the far more difficult false memory charm entailed. You had to try to live the other person's entire life inside your own head, at least if you wanted to create the false memories with less than a 16-to-1 slowdown as you separately crafted 16 major tracks of memory. It might have been quiet, there might have been no outward sign, but Harry knew something of the difficulties now, and he knew to be impressed. Professor Quirrell finished and moved on to Tracy Davis, then the three auras, and finally Professor McGonagall. Harry waited, but future Harry made no protest. It was possible that even Professor McGonagall, if she'd been awake, wouldn't have protested. It was not yet the Ides of May, and apparently there would be a surprisingly good explanation. With a gesture, Draco's stunned body was lifted and sent a short distance into the woods before being carefully deposited on the ground. Then a final gesture from Professor Quirrell ripped a huge chunk out of the unicorn's side, leaving behind ragged edges. The raw meat hovered in the air, then wavered in vanishment and was gone. "Done," Professor Quirrell said. "I must depart this place now, Mr. Potter. Come with me and remain here." Professor Quirrell strode away, and Harry followed and remained behind. They walked through the woods in silence for a time, before Harry heard faint voices in the distance. The next set of auras, presumably, after the first set had fallen out of contact. What his future self was saying, Harry didn't know. "They won't detect us, nor hear our speech," said Professor Quirrell. The sense of power and doom around the defense professor was still strong. The man seated himself on a tree stump, one where the light of the almost full moon fell full on him. I should first say that when you speak to the auras, in the future, you should tell them that you frightened away the seething dark, the same as you did that Dementor. It is what Mr. Malfoy will remember seeing. Professor Quirrell gave a small sigh. It may cause some alarm if they conclude that some horror kin to Dementors and strong enough to break the aura's shields is loose in the Forbidden Forest. But I could not think of what else to do. If the forest is better guarded after this, but with any luck I have already consumed what I need. Would you mind telling me how you arrived so quickly? How did you know Mr. Malfoy was in trouble? After Captain Brodsky had learned that Draco Malfoy was in the Forbidden Forest, seemingly in the company of Rubeus Hagrid, Brodsky had begun inquiring to find out who had authorized this, and had still been unable to find out when Draco Malfoy had missed check-in. Despite Harry's protests, the Aura captain, who was authorized to know about time turners, had refused to allow deployment to before the time of the missed check-in. There were standard procedures involving time. But Brodsky had given Harry written orders allowing him to go back and deploy an Aura trio to arrive 1 second after the missed check-in time. There had been a Patronus charm to locate Draco, which Harry had successfully willed to take the form of a ball of pure silver light, and the flight of auras had arrived on time to the second. I'm afraid I couldn't say, Harry replied evenly. Professor Quirrell was still a major suspect, and it was good for him not to know the details. Now, why are you eating unicorns? Ah, Professor Quirrell said. As to that, the man hesitated. I was drinking the blood of unicorns, not eating them. The missing flesh, the ragged marks upon the body, those were to obscure the case, to make it seem like some other predator. The use of unicorn's blood is too well known. I don't know it, Harry said. I know you do not, the defense professor said sharply. Or you would not be pestering me about it. The power of unicorn's blood is to preserve your life for a time, even if you are on the very verge of death. There was a stretch of time when Harry's brain claimed to be refusing to process the words, which was of course a lie, because you couldn't know the meaning you weren't allowed to process, without having already processed it. A strange sense of blankness overtook Harry, an absence of reaction. Maybe this was what other people felt like when someone went off script, and they couldn't say or think of anything to do. Of course, Professor Quirrell was dying, not just occasionally ill. Professor Quirrell had known he was dying. He'd volunteered to take the defense professor position at Hogwarts, after all. Of course, he'd been getting worse the whole school year. Of course, illnesses which kept getting worse had a predictable destination at their end. Harry's brain had surely known already, somewhere in the safe back of his mind, where he could refuse to process things he'd already processed. Of course, that was why Professor Quirrell wouldn't be able to teach battle magic next year. Professor McGonagall wouldn't even have to fire him. He would just be dead. No, Harry said, his voice a little shaky. There has to be a way. I am not stupid nor particularly eager to die. I have already looked. I had to go this far simply to last out my lesson plans, having less time than I had thought, and the head of the dark moonlit figure turned away. I think I do not want to hear about it, Mr. Potter. Harry's breath hitched. Too many emotions were bubbling up in him at once. After denial came anger, according to a ritual someone had just made up, and yet it seemed surprisingly appropriate. And why? Harry's breath hitched again. Why isn't unicorn's blood standard in healers' kits then, to keep someone alive, even if they're on the very verge of dying from their legs being eaten? Because there are permanent side effects, Professor Quirrell said quietly. Side effects, side effects. What kind of side effect is medically worse than death? Harry's voice rose on the last word until he was shouting. Not everyone thinks the same way we do, Mr. Potter, though to be fair, the blood must come from a live unicorn, and the unicorn must die in the drinking. Would I be here otherwise? Harry turned, stared at the surrounding trees. Have a herd of unicorns at St. Mungo's, flew the patients there, or use portkeys? Yes, that would work. Harry's face tightened, the only outward sign behind his trembling hands of everything that was welling up inside him. He needed to scream, needed some outlet, needed something he couldn't name, and finally Harry leveled his wand at a tree and shouted Defindo. There was a sharp tearing sound, and a cut appeared across the wood. Defindo! Another cut. Harry had learned the charm only 10 days previously, after he'd started getting serious about self-defense. It was theoretically a second-year charm, but the anger pouring through him seemed to know no bounds. He knew enough now not to exhaust himself, and he still had power yet. Defindo! Harry had aimed at a branch this time, and it plummeted to the ground with a sound of twigs and leaves. There didn't seem to be any tears inside him, only pressure with no outlet. "I shall leave you to it," Professor Quirrell said quietly. The defense professor rose from his tree stump, the unicorn's blood still moonlit on the black cloak he wore, and drew his hood back over his head. 101. Precautionary Measures, PT2. Harry stood, panting, in the midst of a brief wasted circle amid the forest, more destruction than a first year should have been able to reach, by himself. The severing charm wouldn't bring down a tree, so he'd started partially transfiguring cross-sections through the wood. It hadn't let out what was inside him. Bringing down a small circle of trees hadn't made him feel any better. All the emotions were still there, but while he was destroying trees, he at least wasn't thinking about how the feelings couldn't be let out. After Harry had run out of available magic, he'd started tearing off branches with his bare hands and snapping them. His hands were bleeding, though nothing that Madame Pomfrey couldn't fix in the morning. Only dark magic left permanent scars on wizards. There came a sound of something moving in the woods, like the hoofbeats of a horse, and Harry whirled, his wand rising once more. Some part of his magic had returned while he was working with his hands. It occurred to him for the first time that he was out in the forbidden forest alone and making noise. What emerged into the moonlight was not the unicorn Harry had expected, but a creature with a lower body like that of a horse, gleaming white-brown beneath the moonlight, and the bare upper chest of a male human with long white hair. The moonlight caught the centaur's face, and Harry saw that the eyes were almost as blue as Dumbledore's, halfway to sapphire. In one hand the centaur held a long wooden spear with an overlarge metal blade whose edge did not gleam beneath the moonlight. A gleaming edge, Harry had once read, was the sign of a dull blade. "So," the centaur said. His voice was low, powerful, and male. "Here you are, surrounded by destruction. I can smell the unicorn's blood in the air, the blood of something innocent, slain to save oneself." A jolt of sudden fear brought Harry into the now, and he said quickly, "It's not what it looks like." "I know." The stars themselves proclaim your innocence, ironically enough. The centaur took a step toward Harry within the small clearing, still holding his spear upright. A strange word, innocence. It means lack of knowledge, like the innocence of a child, and also means lack of guilt. Only those entirely ignorant can lack all responsibility for the consequences of their actions. He knows not what he does, and therefore can be without harmful intent, so says that word. The deep voice did not echo in the woods. Harry's eyes flickered to the spear tip, and he realized that he should have grabbed his time-turner the moment he saw the centaur. Now, if Harry tried to reach beneath his robes, the spear could strike him before then, if the centaur was fast enough. "I read once," Harry said, his voice a bit unsteady as he tried to match deep-sounding words to deep-sounding words, "that it's wrong to think of little children as innocent, because not knowing isn't the same as not choosing. That children do little harms to each other with schoolyard fights because they don't have the power to do great harm, and some adults do great harm, but the adults who don't, aren't they more innocent than children, not less? The wisdom of wizards," the centaur said. "Muggle wisdom, actually. Of the magicless I know little. Mars has been dim of late, but it grows brighter." The centaur took another step forwards, bringing him almost within striking distance of Harry. Harry didn't dare look up to the sky. That means Mars is coming closer to the Earth as both planets go around the sun. Mars is reflecting the same amount of sunlight as always. It's just getting nearer to us. "What do you mean the stars proclaim my innocence?" "The night sky speaks to centaurs. It is how we know what we know, or do they not even tell wizards that much these days?" A look of contempt crossed the centaur's face. "I tried to look up centaurs when I was checking out divination. Most of the authors just ridiculed centaur divination without explaining why. Wizards don't understand argumentative norms. To them, ridiculing an idea or a person feels like casting that idea down just as much as bringing evidence against it. I thought the part about centaurs using astrology was just more ridicule." "Why?" the centaur intoned. His head cocked curiously, because the course of the planets is predictable for thousands of years in advance. If I talk to the right muggles, I could show you a diagram of exactly what the planets will look like from this spot 10 years later. Would you be able to make predictions from that? The centaur shook his head. From a diagram? No. The light of the planets, the comets, the subtle shifts in the stars themselves, those I would not see. Cometary orbits are also set thousands of years in advance, so they shouldn't correlate much to current events. And the light of the stars takes years to travel from the stars to Earth, and the stars don't move much at all, not visibly. So the obvious hypothesis is that centaurs have a native magical talent for divination which you just, well, project onto the night sky. Perhaps, the centaur said thoughtfully, his head lowered. The others would strike you for saying such a thing, but I have ever sought to know what I do not know. Why the night sky can foretell the future that I surely do not know. It is hard enough to grasp the skill itself. All I can say, son of Lily, is that even if what you are saying is true, it does not seem useful. Harry allowed himself to relax a little. Being addressed as son of Lily implied that the centaur thought of him as more than a random intruder in the forest. Besides, attacking a Hogwarts student would probably bring some kind of huge reprisal upon the non-wizard centaur tribe in the forests, and the centaur probably knew that. What muggles have learned is that there is a power in the truth, in all the pieces of the truth which interact with each other, which you can only find by discovering as many truths as possible. To do that, you can't defend false beliefs in any way, not even by saying the false belief is useful. It might not seem to matter whether your predictions are really based on the stars, or if it's an innate talent being projected. But if you wanted to really understand divination, or for that matter the stars, the real truth about centaur predictions would be a fact that matters to other truths. Slowly the centaur nodded. So the wandless had become wiser than the wizards. What a joke! Tell me, son of Lily, do the muggles in their wisdom say that soon the skies will be empty? Empty, Harry said. No. The other centaurs in this forest have stayed from your presence, for we are sworn not to set ourselves against the heavens' course. Because in becoming entangled in your fate, we might become less innocent in what is to come. I alone have dared approach you. I don't understand. No, you are innocent, as the stars say. And to slay something innocent to save oneself, that is a terrible deed. One would live only a cursed life, a half-life, from that day. For any centaur would surely be cast out if he slew a foal. The spear made a lightning motion, too fast for Harry's eyes to follow, and smashed his wand out of his hand. Another powerful blow smashed into Harry's solar plexus, and he went gasping and retching to the forest floor. Harry's hand reached up toward his robes for his time-turner, and the spear butt knocked his hand away, almost hard enough to break fingers. He reached with his other hand, and that was knocked away too. I am sorry, Harry Potter, the centaur said, and then looked up with widened eyes. The spear spun about and came up, intercepting a red spellbolt. Then the centaur dropped the spear and leaped away desperately. A green flash of light went past him, and another green flash of light followed in its wake. Then a third green flash hit the centaur straight on. The centaur fell and did not move again. It took a long time for Harry to catch his breath, to stagger to his feet, to pick up his wand, to croak. What? By that time the sense of doom, of power almost tangible in the air, had approached once more. Professor Quirrell, what are you doing here? Well, the man in the black cloak said thoughtfully, you needed to fly into a rage and have a loud tantrum in the forbidden forest in the middle of the night, and I needed to go just outside your ability to detect me and keep watch. One does not leave a student alone in the forbidden forest. That should be obvious in retrospect. Harry stared at the fallen centaur. The horse form wasn't breathing. You killed him. That was Avada Kedavra. I do not always understand how other people imagine morality to work, Mr. Potter. But even I know that on conventional morality, it is acceptable to kill non-human creatures which are about to slay a wizard child. Perhaps you do not care about the non-human part, but he was about to kill you. He was hardly innocent. The defense professor stopped, looking at Harry, who had raised one trembling hand to his mouth. Well, the defense professor said then, I have made my point, and you may think on it. Centaur spears can block many spells, but no one tries to block if they see that the spell is a certain shade of green. For this purpose, it is useful to know some green, stunning hexes. Really, Mr. Potter, you should understand by now how I operate." The defense professor came nearer the centaur's body, and Harry took an involuntary step back, then another at the terrible rising sense of stop. "Don't." The defense professor kneeled and pressed his wand to the centaur's head. The wand stayed there for a time, and the centaur rose, eyes blank, breathing once more. "Remember nothing of this time," the defense professor commanded. "Wander away and forget everything about this night." The centaur walked away, the four horse legs moving in strange synchrony. "Happy now," the defense professor said, sounding rather sardonic about it. Harry's brain still felt broken. He was trying to kill me. Oh, for Merlin's sake, yes, he was trying to kill you. Get used to it. Only boring people never have that experience. Harry's voice emerged hoarse. Why did he want to? Any number of reasons. I would be lying if I said I'd never considered killing you myself. Harry stared at where the centaur had wandered into the trees. His brain still felt half broken, like an engine misfiring, but Harry did not see how this could possibly be a good sign. The news of Draco Malfoy nearly being eaten by a horror had been sufficient to summon back Dumbledore from wherever he'd gone, to wake Lord Malfoy and the Lady Greengrass's handsome husband, to bring forth Amelia Bones. The supposed presence of the horror had provoked skepticism even from Dumbledore, and the possibility of false memory charms had been raised. Harry had said, after some internal debate about the consequences of people believing a demon was on the loose, that he didn't actually remember making the same effort he put forth to frighten the Dementor. The dark thing had just left, which was what you would expect someone to create as a false memory if they hadn't actually known how Harry had done it. The names of Bellatrix Black, Severus Snape, and Quirinus Quirrell had been mentioned in connection with wizards strong enough to subdue everyone present and cast false memory charms, and Harry had known that Lucius was thinking of Dumbledore. There had been auras testifying, and discussions going in circles, and glares of accusation, and cutting remarks at 2 a.m. in the morning. There had been motions, and votes, and consequences. "Do you believe," Headmaster Dumbledore said quietly to Harry, when all of it was done, and the two of them alone, "that the Hogwarts you have wrought is an improvement?" Harry sat with his elbows on his knees, his face resting on his palms, in the conference room from which all the others had now departed. Professor McGonagall, who did not use a time-turner as routinely as the two of them, had departed swiftly for her bed. "Yes," Harry answered, after too long a hesitation. "From my perspective, Headmaster, things in Hogwarts are finally normal. This is how things should be when 4 children get sent into the Forbidden Forest at night. There should be a huge fuss, constables showing up, and the responsible party getting sacked." "You believe it is good," Dumbledore said quietly, "that the man who you call responsible was, as you put it, sacked." "Yes, in fact, I do. Argus Filch has served this institution for decades." "And when given Veritaserum," Harry said tiredly, "Argus Filch revealed that he had sent an 11-year-old boy into the Forbidden Forest, hoping something awful would happen to him, because he thought the boy's father had been responsible for the death of his cat. The 3 other students in Draco's company don't seem to have fazed him. I would have argued for jail time, but your concept of jail in this country is Azkaban. I'll also note that Filch was remarkably unpleasant to the children in Hogwarts, and I expect the school's hedonic index to be improved by his departure, not that it matters to you, I suppose." The headmaster's eyes were impenetrable behind the half-moon glasses. "Argus Filch is a squib. His work at Hogwarts is all he had rather. The purpose of a school is not to provide work for its employees. I know you probably spent more time around Filch than around any individual student, but that shouldn't make Filch's inner experiences loom larger in your thoughts. Students have inner lives too. You don't care at all, do you, Harry?" Dumbledore's voice was quiet. "About those you hurt." "I care about the innocent," Harry said. "Like Mr. Hagrid, who you'll note I argued should not be considered malicious, just oblivious. I was fine with Mr. Hagrid working here so long as he didn't take anyone into the Forbidden Forest again. I had thought that with Rubeus vindicated, he might teach care of magical creatures after Sylvanus departs the position, but much of that teaching is done in the Forbidden Forest, so that too shall not be in the wake of your passage," Harry said slowly. But you told us that Mr. Hagrid has a blind spot when it comes to magical creatures threatening wizards. That Mr. Hagrid had a cognitive deficit and couldn't really imagine Draco and Tracy getting hurt, which was why Mr. Hagrid didn't see anything wrong with leaving them alone in the Forbidden Forest at night. Was that not true? It is true. Then wouldn't Mr. Hagrid be the worst possible teacher for magical creatures? The old wizard gazed down at Harry through the half-moon glasses. His voice was thick when he spoke. Mr. Malfoy himself saw nothing awry. It was not so implausible a trick which Argus played Harry Potter, and Rubeus might have grown into his position. It would have been all Rubeus wished, his one greatest desire. Your mistake, Harry said, looking down at his knees, feeling at least 10% as exhausted as he'd ever been, is a cognitive bias we would call, in the trade, scope insensitivity. Failure to multiply. You're thinking about how happy Mr. Hagrid would be when he heard the news. Consider the next 10 years and 1,000 students taking magical creatures and 10% of them being scolded by Ashwinders. No one student would be hurt as much as Mr. Hagrid would be happy, but there'd be 100 students being hurt and only one happy teacher. Perhaps, the old wizard said. And your own error, Harry, is that you do not feel the pain of those you hurt once you have done your multiplication. Maybe. Harry went on staring at his knees. Or maybe it's worse than that. Headmaster, what does it mean if a centaur doesn't like me? What does it mean when a member of a race of magical creatures known for divination gives you a lecture on people who are ignorant of consequences, apologizes, and then tries to stab you with a spear? A centaur, the headmaster said. When did you? Ah, the time turner. You are the reason why I could not travel back to before the event on pain of paradox. Am I? I guess I am. Harry shook his head distantly. Sorry. With very few exceptions, Dumbledore said, centaurs do not like wizards at all. This was a bit more specific than that. What did the centaur say to you? Harry didn't reply. Ah, the headmaster hesitated. Centaurs have been wrong many times, and if there is anyone in the world who could confuse the stars themselves, it is you. Harry looked up and saw the blue eyes once more gentle behind the half-circle glasses. Do not fret too much about it, said Albus Dumbledore.